The galaxy was used to the unexpected. Strange ships, alien signals, and strange species had come and gone. But nothing had prepared the galaxy for the arrival of the Deathworlders. They came with no warning, no fanfare. One moment, the stars were peaceful, and the next, the galaxy's most advanced systems detected a ship entering their space. It was massive, much larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ship's technology was beyond anything the galaxy's brightest minds could understand. It had no visible weapons, no signs of aggression, but something about it felt different. The people of the galaxy watched with a mix of curiosity and fear as the unknown vessel continued its journey, heading straight toward the heart of the Galactic Council. The Deathworlders' home planet, a place known only by a few legends, was one of the deadliest worlds in existence. Those who lived there had survived environments so harsh that it was said they could withstand conditions that would destroy entire species. But what made them most terrifying was their intelligence. They were a race that combined brutal survival instincts with brilliant minds that had evolved to adapt to the most hostile of worlds. The Galactic Council called for an emergency meeting. Leaders from all across the galaxy, representatives from 1,000 different species, gathered to discuss this new threat. They were not prepared for what would come next. The Deathworlders didn't arrive with demands or threats. They didn't show any interest in negotiations or politics. They simply came, and the moment they landed, everything changed. The Council had never seen a species quite like them. The Deathworlders were humanoid in shape, but their skin was a dark, leathery gray that seemed to shimmer under the light of the Galactic Council's massive station. Their eyes were large and black, reflecting the harsh conditions of their homeworld. The way they moved was fluid, purposeful, and carried an aura of calm strength. They spoke little, but their presence was overwhelming. The first meeting was brief. The Deathworlders did not speak in the common galactic tongue. Instead, they spoke in a language that was ancient, almost forgotten. But they came with something unexpected. A message encoded into a strange series of symbols that no one could decipher. This was their first offering, a simple task. The task was simple, yet its meaning eluded the brightest minds in the galaxy. It was a series of numbers and patterns that made no sense. The galactic scientists and engineers spent days analyzing the task. The task seemed so basic at first glance, almost like a school assignment. Yet the deeper they looked into it, the more they realized that this was no ordinary challenge. The symbols were not just random. They were connected to something far more complicated, something dangerous. At first, the Council thought it was a test, a challenge from the Deathworlders to see how the galaxy would respond. But as the hours turned into days, it became clear that this was no ordinary challenge. The task wasn't designed to test the galaxy's intelligence. No, it was designed to test something else, something far more important. Rumors began to spread. There were whispers in the council chambers, among the lesser species, and among the citizens of the galaxy. Some said that the task was a message. Others claimed that it was a warning. The truth was, no one knew what to make of it. The more they tried to solve it, the more baffling it became. The council was shaken. For the first time in centuries, the leaders of the galaxy felt like they were out of their depth. The Deathworlders had come to their doorstep, and they were showing them that they were not prepared. The task they had been given was beyond them. Tension began to rise. Some species called for immediate action, others advocated for diplomacy, and a few even suggested preparing for war. But there was one thing that everyone agreed on. The Deathworlders were not to be underestimated. A team of the galaxy's most brilliant minds was assembled. They worked day and night, trying to decode the task. But every time they thought they had cracked the code, they were thrown back to square one. The patterns were too complex. The numbers didn't add up. The symbols didn't fit into any known language. It was then that one of the human engineers, someone who had no formal training in alien languages or advanced physics, came forward with a wild theory. She proposed that the Deathworlders weren't just testing their intelligence. They were testing something else. their ability to adapt, to think outside of their own narrow perceptions of reality. Her theory shocked the council. If she was right, this task wasn't just about solving a puzzle. It was about changing the way the galaxy thought. It was about challenging everything they had ever known. And the more they thought about it, the more it made sense. The Deathworlders weren't here to take over. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to force the galaxy to see things in a new way. And that realization changed everything. The Deathworlders weren't just another species to be dealt with. They were a mirror that reflected the galaxy's weaknesses, its complacency, and its ignorance. They had arrived not to fight, but to teach. But there was a deeper question now. What would happen next? How would the galaxy respond to this new dangerous challenge? And more importantly, what would happen if they failed to understand the lesson the Deathworlders had set before them? The meeting ended in silence. The galaxy's greatest minds were speechless, not because they couldn't understand the task, but because they realized that the task wasn't just about knowledge. It was about survival. And the Deathworlders had just begun to show them that sometimes intelligence alone isn't enough. The Deathworlders had left, but their presence lingered in the minds of the galaxy's leaders. Every thought, every conversation was clouded by the mysterious task they had left behind. No one could ignore it. The cryptic symbols, the complex patterns, nothing made sense. The more the galaxy's brightest minds worked on it, the more questions emerged. Humanity's scientists, engineers, and cryptographers, used to solving problems with logic and reason, found themselves confounded. How could something so simple on the surface be so impossible? Was it a riddle, a puzzle, or something far deeper, something that challenged the very essence of their understanding? The Galactic Council called for a special summit. Leaders and scientists from hundreds of species gathered, their minds buzzing with confusion and fear. The Deathworlders had given them a task, but they had also given them something else, an insight into their superiority. In the halls of the council, whispers spread like wildfire. If they failed to solve this task, what would happen next? Would the Deathworlders return with a more dangerous challenge? Or was this the first step in something far more threatening? Among the council members, one figure stood out. A human named Dr. Evelyn Crane, a cryptographer who had spent most of her life working on alien languages. She was known for her bold theories and her ability to solve problems that others considered unsolvable. Despite the complexity of the task, she had a theory of her own, a theory that had been brewing in the back of her mind ever since the Deathworlders left. She gathered a small team of specialists, each from a different species, and locked herself in a secured room for days. They examined the task, each approaching it with their own methods. But no matter what they tried, the answers eluded them. They ran simulations, analyzed every symbol, and studied ancient texts. But every time they thought they were close, the pattern would shift, slipping just out of their grasp. Frustration mounted. The galaxy's brightest minds were left scratching their heads. What was the Deathworlders' purpose? What was the meaning behind the task? Were they trying to mock the galaxy's intelligence? Or was there something deeper at play here? Dr. Crane refused to give up. In her quiet moments of reflection, she started to notice something. The symbols, the numbers, they were too precise, too calculated. They weren't just random. They were carefully designed to provoke thought. Perhaps the key wasn't in the symbols themselves, but in the way they were meant to be interpreted. She believed the Deathworlders were challenging the galaxy not just to solve a problem, but to think differently. "We're too focused on finding the right answer," Dr. Crane said, turning to her team. "What if the point of the task isn't to find an answer at all? What if it's about something else, about how we approach the problem?" Her words didn't fall on deaf ears. Her team agreed, and they began to shift their approach. Rather than looking for a direct solution, they started exploring the task's broader implications. They examined the nature of the symbols, the order in which they appeared, and the relationships between them. This was no longer just a riddle. It was a test of their minds, their ability to adapt and think in new ways. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount. The council leaders grew impatient, their demands for answers more urgent with each passing day. But Dr. Crane and her team remained focused. They knew they were on the brink of a breakthrough. Then, one evening, a breakthrough came. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a quiet realization, a shift in perspective. One of the symbols, which had previously been dismissed as irrelevant, was key. It represented a concept not of numbers or logic, but of perspective itself. The task was less about finding a hidden meaning in the symbols, and more about understanding the relationship between them. It's not about solving the task, Dr. Crane whispered to herself. It's about understanding that we're not looking at it the right way. The team spent another week adjusting their approach. They re-examined the task not as an isolated puzzle, but as part of a larger framework, a framework that mirrored the galaxy's own challenges. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. But even as they made progress, something else began to weigh on Dr. Crane's mind. What did this all mean? Why had the Deathworlders given them this task? Was it a test of their intelligence, or something more sinister? The galaxy had always prided itself on its advanced knowledge and technology, but now they were faced with an alien intelligence that seemed to be on an entirely different level. She couldn't help but feel a deep unease. If the Deathworlders had been able to leave the galaxy's greatest minds so utterly baffled, what else were they capable of? Was the task a warning or a precursor to something far more dangerous? As the team pieced together the final elements of the puzzle, they began to realize something even more unsettling. The task was not a challenge to be conquered. It was an invitation to a new way of thinking. And as they worked, it became clear that the Deathworlders were not just testing their intelligence. They were testing the galaxy's ability to adapt, to evolve. The task was not an impossible riddle. It was a lesson, and the galaxy had only just begun to understand what it meant. The weeks dragged on, and the pressure on Dr. Crane's team only intensified. Every day that passed without a breakthrough was another day that the galaxy's leaders grew more anxious. Whispers about the Deathworlders' true intentions filled the corridors of the Galactic Council. The task they had been given had become more than just a riddle. It was a matter of survival. The very future of the galaxy seemed to hinge on understanding it. Dr. Crane had not slept properly for days, but her mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were close, so close to unlocking the final piece of the puzzle. The symbols, the patterns, they all made sense, but only if they viewed them in a way that no one had thought of before. The galaxy's scientific community had always approached problems from a logical, structured perspective. But this task demanded creativity, flexibility, and an understanding of the intangible. As her team worked tirelessly through the night, something incredible happened. One of the researchers, a young alien named Zelthor, who had been silent for most of the project, suddenly stood up and pointed at the central symbol on the holographic display. "I think I've got it," Zelthor said, his voice trembling. The others rushed over, eager to see what he had discovered. Zelthor's finger traced the outline of a particular symbol. It had always been the most perplexing, the one that didn't seem to fit. But now, with fresh eyes, it began to make sense. The symbol wasn't just a design, it was a concept. It represented time, but not in the conventional sense. This was a representation of nonlinear time, of perspectives shifting and folding into one another, as if the past, present, and future were intertwined. Dr. Crane's eyes widened in realization. "That's it," she whispered. The task was never about solving a puzzle or finding a solution. It was about understanding a new dimension, a new way of thinking. The Deathworlders were testing our capacity to break free from linear thinking and embrace the complexity of the universe. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the room lifted. The team had cracked the code, but the implications of their discovery were far from simple. The task wasn't just a challenge to the galaxy's intellectual might. It was a message, a reminder that the universe was far bigger, far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. But even as the team celebrated their success, Dr. Crane couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play here. The Deathworlders hadn't just challenged the galaxy's greatest minds, they had invited them into a new realm of thinking, one where the boundaries of time, space, and understanding could be bent and reshaped. "What do we do now?" Selthor asked, breaking her thoughts. "What does this mean for us?" Dr. Crane stared at the symbols floating before them, now beginning to align in a way that made sense. But instead of feeling victorious, she felt a growing sense of unease. The task had been solved, but the galaxy had been changed by it. The Deathworlders had given them more than just a puzzle to solve. They had given them a glimpse into a universe where everything they knew was up for challenge. "What it means," Dr. Crane said slowly, "is that the galaxy can no longer be the same. We've only just begun to understand what we've been shown." The implications of this discovery rippled through her mind. The Deathworlders weren't just testing their intelligence. They were showing them a new way to think, one that could change the course of history. And perhaps that was the point all along. Humanity and its allies had relied on structured, predictable ways of thinking, but the Deathworlders had shown them that the universe didn't always work in neat, logical patterns. "This task wasn't about proving us to be better or worse," Dr. Crane continued. "It was a lesson in humility, in adaptability." The team sat in silence, absorbing the weight of her words. They had solved the task, but the real challenge had only just begun. They had opened a door, and they couldn't see what lay beyond it. Suddenly, the display flickered, and a new set of symbols appeared, ones they hadn't seen before. The task wasn't over. A wave of tension washed over the room. The galaxy's greatest minds had been humbled. But what did this next challenge mean? Was it the final test, or was it the beginning of something much, much bigger? Dr. Crane exchanged a look with her team. The answers they sought were still out of reach, and there was no telling where this path would lead. But one thing was certain: the Deathworlders' challenge had only just begun, and the galaxy was no longer the same. As Dr. Crane and her team stared at the new set of symbols that had appeared on the holographic display, their hearts pounded in their chests. The task was far from over. In fact, it had taken a sharp turn into a realm they were not prepared for. The symbols were different this time, less structured, more abstract. They made no sense at first glance, and the team was left scrambling to find the meaning behind them. "What is this?" Selthor asked, his voice shaky. "This is completely different from the first set. It's as if the rules have changed." Dr. Crane was deep in thought, her mind racing. She had thought that the Deathworlders had given them a clear puzzle to solve, one that would prove the galaxy's greatest minds could rise to the challenge. But this wasn't a puzzle. This was something else entirely. The Deathworlders were not testing their intellect. They were testing their ability to adapt, to change the way they thought. Dr. Crane's eyes narrowed as she studied the new symbols. They were so unlike the structured, linear patterns of the previous set. But then, something clicked in her mind. The symbols weren't meant to be read in a traditional manner. They were designed to be interpreted as a sequence of events, moments, experiences, all strung together in a chaotic, overlapping mess. Time wasn't meant to be linear. It was fluid, bending and twisting in ways they hadn't yet imagined. "Wait," Dr. Crane said aloud, standing up suddenly. "I think I understand." Her team turned toward her, their faces a mix of confusion and hope. They had been struggling with this new set of symbols for hours, and Dr. Crane's words felt like a beacon of clarity in the storm of uncertainty. "We've been approaching this all wrong," Dr. Crane continued, pacing as she spoke. "The Deathworlders want us to think differently. They're showing us that the galaxy operates on a different set of rules than what we've been taught. Time, knowledge, even life itself. All of it is more fluid, more interconnected than we've ever realized." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. The Deathworlders had proven that they were more than just a challenge. They were a force that could reshape how the galaxy understood the universe itself. It wasn't enough to be the smartest or the most logical. They had to learn to embrace chaos, to think in ways that defied tradition. The rest of the team was silent, trying to process the implications of Dr. Crane's realization. The holographic display now flickered again, revealing even more complex symbols that seemed to bleed into one another. It was as if the boundaries of space and time were being torn apart, and the universe was becoming an intricate, tangled web of possibilities. "Do you think?" Zelthor began, but he trailed off, unsure of how to finish his thought. Dr. Crane nodded gravely. "Yes, the Deathworlders are showing us that there is no clear, defined path forward. There are no simple answers. What we've learned from this task is that the universe isn't something that can be solved by logic alone. To truly understand it, we need to accept that some things are beyond our control, beyond our comprehension." But even as the weight of this new truth settled over them, Dr. Crane couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had started to build in her chest. The Deathworlders had pushed them this far. What would they do next? Was this task really meant to make them think differently, or was there a deeper, darker purpose behind it all? The thought gnawed at her. She had seen what humanity was capable of, what the galaxy's greatest minds could accomplish when they worked together. But she hadn't yet seen what they could do when faced with the unknown, when they were forced to confront forces far greater than themselves. Another flicker of light interrupted her thoughts. A new symbol appeared in the center of the display, more ominous than the others. It was a shape they had never seen before, shifting and pulsing in a way that sent a chill down Dr. Crane's spine. "It's a warning," she said, her voice tense. "They've set us on a path, but now we're crossing into something we can't predict." For the first time, doubt crept into the minds of Dr. Crane and her team. Had they been too eager to solve the task? Too eager to prove themselves? What if they had overlooked something critical? What if the Deathworlders' ultimate test wasn't about understanding, but about survival? The room was silent as the team exchanged nervous glances. There was no going back now. They had crossed a line, and there was no telling what would happen next. The Deathworlders were watching, and they were waiting for humanity to make its next move. Would they be able to rise to the challenge? Or would they fail, consumed by the very forces they had sought to understand? Dr. Crane's heart raced. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, and she had no idea what would come next. Dr. Crane stood frozen in place, her eyes fixed on the new symbol that had appeared on the holographic display. It was unlike anything they had seen before. An abstract shape, constantly shifting, a twisted spiral that seemed to eat itself from the inside out. The room was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of the machine and the distant beeping of data inputs breaking the silence. Zelthor, the alien linguist, stood beside her, his antennae twitching nervously. This isn't just a puzzle," he murmured. "This is a warning. I can feel it in my very core." The others on the team nodded, the sense of foreboding growing heavier with each passing moment. The symbols from earlier had been difficult, yes, but this felt different. It felt dangerous, like the Deathworlders were leading them into a trap, testing not just their intellect, but their very survival instincts. Dr. Crane swallowed hard. She knew that the stakes had shifted dramatically. This wasn't about proving themselves to be the smartest. It was about proving that humanity could adapt, could survive, in a universe that didn't play by the same rules they had known. "We can't back out now," Dr. Crane said, her voice trembling slightly, but resolute. "We've come too far. We have to finish this, whatever it is." Zelthor exchanged a look with her. He knew she was right, but the fear in his eyes was palpable. The task they had started seemed so simple when they had first begun. Solve a puzzle, outsmart the Deathworlders. But as they dug deeper, they began to realize that this was no ordinary test. There was something far darker at play. The stakes weren't just academic anymore. The lives of everyone in the galaxy could be on the line. Dr. Crane turned back to the display. The spiral was no longer static. It was moving, shifting rapidly. And then, without warning, the hologram split into multiple layers. The symbols overlapped and intermingled, forming a chaotic mess that didn't make sense. A few of the symbols faded in and out, almost as if they were teasing the team, daring them to understand. "Is it some kind of code?" Dr. Crane asked, trying to grasp onto the threads of logic that might lead to an answer. Xelthor shook his head. "No, it's more like a warning embedded in time itself. This isn't something that can be solved with our knowledge of logic. It feels like the Deathworlders are showing us the vastness of their understanding and how small we truly are." Dr. Crane took a deep breath, her mind racing. If the Deathworlders were trying to show them how insignificant they were, it was working. Every attempt they made to solve the puzzle felt like they were standing at the edge of a precipice, peering into the unknown. Suddenly, the display changed again. A new symbol appeared, a perfect circle with a small dot in the center. And below it, there was one single word in a language none of them recognized. It flickered on and off, like a signal that refused to stay in place long enough to be understood. But something about it felt urgent. "What's it saying?" Dr. Crane asked, her voice tense. Xelthor furrowed his brow and leaned closer. He studied the symbol, his fingers tapping the table nervously. "It's not a word. It's a concept. Something like balance. But it's not about physical balance. It's more philosophical, universal balance. It's as if they're saying that everything is connected. Every action, every thought. It affects the universe in ways we can't even imagine." The rest of the team fell silent, absorbing the weight of Xelthor's words. If the Deathworlders were right, then humanity wasn't just solving a puzzle. They were tampering with something far more dangerous, the very fabric of existence. A cold chill ran through Dr. Crane as she realized the true scope of the test. The Deathworlders weren't just pushing them to think differently. They were showing them that every choice they made, every solution they discovered, could have far-reaching consequences, and the more they discovered, the more they realized how little they understood. The team fell into a heavy silence. The symbols on the display continued to shift and move, creating an overwhelming sense of chaos. It was as if the universe itself was in a state of constant flux, and the Deathworlders were daring them to catch up. But there was a sinister undertone to the test, one that suggested their pursuit of knowledge could have catastrophic consequences. Dr. Crane's mind raced. What had the Deathworlders been trying to teach them all along? Had they made a mistake in thinking this was just a puzzle? Was this something far deeper, something that could unravel the very fabric of reality? And if it was, were they ready to face the consequences? As the symbols on the display faded into darkness, a new message appeared. "The choice is yours." The team stared at it in shock. What did it mean? What choice? The Deathworlders had pushed them to this point. Now it was up to humanity to decide. Would they take the next step into the unknown, knowing the consequences could be beyond their comprehension? Or would they turn back, abandoning the task and hoping to avoid the disaster they could sense looming? The decision was theirs to make, but they knew, deep down, that there would be no turning back. The words on the screen burned into Dr. Crane's mind. "The choice is yours." No one in the room spoke for a long moment, the weight of those words pressing heavily on their shoulders. Humanity had already ventured too far into the unknown. There was no going back now, not without answers. The room felt small, the walls closing in as they stared at the cryptic message. "We can't back out now," Dr. Crane whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice was calm, but the anxiety rippled beneath. "We have no choice but to move forward. If we stop now, we may never understand what the Deathworlders wanted us to learn." Xelthor, who had been nervously pacing the room, stopped in his tracks. His antennae drooped slightly. His usual composed demeanor cracked under the pressure. "But what if moving forward leads to something we can't handle? What if we're not ready for what they want us to see?" The room fell into silence again. The fear was palpable. None of them knew the full extent of what the Deathworlders had intended with this task. The galaxy's most brilliant minds, human and alien, had been defeated by a task that seemed deceptively simple at first, but had grown more complex with each passing moment. Every solution they arrived at only led to more questions, to more mystery. Dr. Crane turned her attention to the hologram once again. The words still flickered on the display. The choice is yours. It almost felt like the Deathworlders were watching them now, waiting for them to make their next move. But how could they be sure? How could they know if the next step would lead to ruin or revolution? Sulfur, Dr. Crane said softly. We've learned more in the last few hours than we have in all our years of studying the galaxy's greatest civilizations. These Deathworlders are pushing us to expand our minds beyond anything we thought possible. We can't turn away from that. Zelthor nodded slowly, though the doubt was still evident in his eyes. But how do we know what the cost will be? What if what's on the other side of this choice is something we can't even comprehend? Dr. Crane turned to the rest of the team. They were all there, watching, waiting. They had all seen the symbols, all wrestled with the strange knowledge that the Deathworlders had shared. They had all felt the weight of this moment pressing down on them. And now, the decision had to be made. Everyone, she said, her voice firm. What we do next will define us. If we move forward, we do so knowing there's no way back. But it's our decision. Do we play it safe and walk away? Or do we embrace the unknown, face whatever consequences await us, and learn what lies at the heart of this test? She paused. The silence in the room was deafening. Each team member's face was a reflection of the choice before them. Fear, uncertainty, curiosity, and, beneath it all, hope. Hope that this journey might lead them to something beyond their wildest dreams. Hope that they could rise to the challenge and prove that humanity was not just capable, but strong enough to face whatever was in the dark. Do we trust the Deathworlders? Dr. Crane asked, her words now carrying the weight of a final decision. Do we trust that there's something to be learned here, something that could push our civilization to new heights? Or do we turn away and admit that we are afraid of the unknown? One by one, the team members stepped forward. It wasn't just Dr. Crane's decision anymore. This was a collective choice. They had all been a part of this puzzle, each contributing to the effort, and now they would face the consequences together. We move forward, said Selthor, his voice steady, but the decision had been made. The choice had been made. The others nodded. Humanity would not shrink from the unknown. Humanity would face this challenge head-on, trusting their ingenuity and their ability to adapt. Dr. Crane's heart pounded in her chest as the decision settled in. Let's see what happens when we make the next move. With a sense of shared determination, they began working again. They keyed in commands, adjusted settings, and studied the data. Slowly, methodically, they began to piece together the hidden meaning behind the symbols. The puzzle had shifted once more, and now it felt like they were on the verge of discovering something huge. Something that might answer the questions about the Deathworlders and the strange puzzle that had brought them together. Suddenly, the hologram shifted again. The swirling symbols aligned. The chaotic mess they had seen earlier began to clear. The perfect circle appeared once more, and within it, a new message was revealed. Balance, Selthor read aloud, his voice trembling. Balance must be maintained, or the universe will collapse under its own weight. Dr. Crane stared at the words, feeling a cold rush run through her veins. They had stepped into a trap, a game far beyond their understanding. But now, there was no turning back. The Deathworlders had made their move, and humanity's choice would shape the course of the galaxy. What they did next would either make them heroes or destroy them all. Dr. Crane stared at the screen, her mind racing with the implications. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. The puzzle had just started to reveal its true depth, and humanity would have to face the consequences of the choice they had made. The team had worked tirelessly for days, decoding the messages, analyzing the symbols, and uncovering the secret behind the Deathworlders puzzle. But despite all their effort, one truth was beginning to settle heavily in their hearts. The task was never truly about the puzzle itself. It was about humanity. It was about how humanity would respond to the challenges thrown before them, and how they would deal with the pressure of the unknown. Dr. Crane and her team stood before the hologram, which had just shifted again. This time, the symbols were gone, replaced with a single image, a vast, spiraling galaxy, its stars flickering ominously. The galaxy they all knew and loved was now a battleground, teetering on the edge of destruction. Humanity was at the center, suspended in the middle of the swirling chaos. "This is it," Zelthor whispered, stepping closer to the projection. "The choice we've made. It's not just about us. It's about every living thing in the galaxy." Dr. Crane's eyes scanned the image, heart racing. The galaxy was changing, but not in the way they had hoped. The Deathworlders had warned them. And yet, they couldn't have prepared for what lay ahead. Every species, every civilization, was now at the mercy of humanity's decision. The words on the screen flickered to life once more. The balance must be restored, or all will fall. Zelthor looked over at Dr. Crane. "What does that mean? How do we restore balance?" Dr. Crane didn't have an answer. She had been asking the same question for days. They had followed the clues, uncovered the patterns, but now they had reached the point where the puzzle had no more pieces. The Deathworlders were waiting for them to make their next move. And with that next move, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Suddenly, a new line of text appeared, almost as if the Deathworlders were speaking directly to them. "Humanity must decide. Will you join us, or will you fall with the rest?" Dr. Crane's breath caught in her throat. It was a stark ultimatum. The Deathworlders had shown humanity the weight of their actions, the consequences that would follow their decision. But how could they make this choice? How could they possibly know what was right? Zelthor's voice trembled as he spoke. "Do we trust them? Can we risk trusting them? These Deathworlders, they are not like anything we've encountered before. What if this is a test to see if we are worthy?" The silence in the room was deafening. The team was divided, their faces showing a mixture of fear, uncertainty, and awe. They had never been faced with a decision of this magnitude. It wasn't just about science anymore. It wasn't about exploration or understanding. This was about survival. This was about deciding the fate of every living being in the galaxy. "We don't have time to second-guess," Dr. Crane said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "If we don't act, if we don't make the choice, the galaxy may be doomed. We have to restore balance. We have to fix this." Zelthor nodded, but he wasn't convinced. But how? What if restoring balance means something we can't understand yet? "Then we have to trust ourselves," Dr. Crane replied, looking each of her team members in the eye. "Humanity has faced impossible odds before. We've survived. We've thrived. If the Deathworlders are giving us this chance, we can't turn away from it." The moment of decision had arrived. There was no turning back now. They had to choose to stand with the galaxy or risk everything for the unknown. Dr. Crane took a deep breath and typed the final command into the system. The hologram shifted one last time. The galaxy's spiraling chaos began to slow, its stars flickering in place, waiting. "We stand with you," Dr. Crane whispered, her voice resolute. "We stand with humanity. We will restore balance." The team watched as the image on the screen shifted once more, revealing a new pattern, one that promised hope. The swirling chaos began to calm, the stars stabilizing, as if humanity's decision had set something into motion. The galaxy had been saved, for now. But in the back of Dr. Crane's mind, she knew that this was just the beginning. They had passed the test, but the real challenge was still to come. The Deathworlders had shown humanity a glimpse of its potential. Now they would watch to see if humanity could truly carry the weight of its decisions. And somewhere, deep in the galaxy, the Deathworlders were watching.